Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, April 29th, 2025, episode 374, and we're going to talk about Pericles' funeral oration. If you read Thucydides on justice, power, and human nature, uh, Pericles' funeral oration or funeral speech can be found in chapter 3. So basically, on justice, power, and human nature are basically selections from Thucydides's historical account on the Peloponnesian War. I think I read once upon a time that basically it's a collection of the speeches that were given, um, in various times of the Peloponnesian War. Ooh, having a little trouble there, maybe because I'm so hungry. But anyway, Pericles was a popular leader in Athens, which basically was a democracy. He was the leader in Athens at the time when Sparta was persuaded by the Corinthians to start a war against Athens. And, I've talked about the relationship between Sparta and Corinth and what they did to attack Athens in another episode. If you just search for Thucydides, you can find the couple other episodes that I did on that, went into that into a little bit more detail. So the war started and they started fighting. And in a wintertime, much like in Russia, you just don't fight in the winter. The bodies started coming home, right? So basically, the fighting season was over. The winter had set in, and so now people are taking a break from fighting. And so the bodies are coming home. Soldiers died. People are upset. Their families are upset. Clearly, a lot of people are in mourning. And so Pericles gives a funeral speech. It's a very public funeral, everyone shows up kind of thing. The city of Athens pays for the funeral. And then he talks about the ancestors or the tradition, the history of Athens. And it kind of gives you that 7 years ago kind of vibe, the Gettysburg Address kind of vibe to inspire people to keep keep people upbeat that yes, they died, but hey, it's for a worthy cause. And then he talks about the customs of Athens, the type of government of Athens, the way of life of Athens, which made Athens great. And so basically, uh, Pericles is talking about how great Athens is, and this is the city that they died for, right? It's just a kind of a nationalistic vibe. I called it city-statism, right? Because they didn't have nations. Each city was kind of a state in and of itself. And so instead of calling it nationalism, I called it city-statism. Here's a quote. We don't imitate the laws of others. We are examples for them. We are a democracy for the majority. We don't look down on poverty. We respect each other's privacy. No shaming, recreation from labor. We have more leisure time because of trade. We're tolerant of the stranger and foreigners. We don't need allies because we are great. This is more of a paraphrase on my part. The city is worthy of admiration. We are lovers of wisdom. At the same time, active in politics. And above all, everyone in Athens is extremely generous. In sum, I say that our city as a whole is a lesson for Greece. Um, each person, a self-sufficient individual, disposed to the widest possible diversity of actions, with every grace and great versatility. Only in the case of Athens can enemies never be upset over the quality of those who defeated them. So basically, Pericles is trying to comfort everyone by saying how great Athens is, and so to die for Athens is kind of an honor, and that Athens is so great. It's such a wonderful place, full of wonderful people, that if they ever had to fight enemies, then the enemies can say, well, we were defeated by Athens. And if you're going to be defeated by a group of people, you want to be defeated by the Athenians. Because to be defeated by barbarians, well, that's a little bit shameful. But Athens, hey, they're awesome. So to be defeated by them, you know. And so it's this weird argument that, Pericles is making. But when I read it the first time, I thought, wow, this speech, if you change around a couple of words, could easily be a speech that's given today in the United States about the United States, because that's pretty much how people talk. And I was discussing with a colleague, and he said the same thing before I was saying it, before I was leading up to it, and then he knew where I was going, and he said, "Yeah, it's like people today plagiarize Pericles. You should read it if you have time." But he goes more. He goes on. There's more. He says that they are all war heroes. Uh, so basically, they're heroes. First casualties come back from the battlefront. Politicians generally they tries to ease the guilt or the grief, their own guilt and the grief of family members by elevating the casualties as war heroes. And this is so that they can maintain the enthusiasm for war. This is all in chapter three. Chapters are not that long. Not only does it cover up the fact that they didn't have to die, right? So if you go back and see that it's the Corinthians who wanted to attack Athens, but they couldn't do it by themselves. And so they dragged Sparta by telling a bunch of half-truths to convince them that Athens was a threat to them. And so with Sparta on their side, Corinthians then uh, have this war with Athens. So in other words, this war did not have to happen if Sparta, saw through what the Corinthians were saying, listened to cooler heads, then the war never would have started. So not only by giving a speech like this and calling them heroes, does it cover up the fact that they didn't have to die, that there didn't have to be a war, but it also covers up any shortcomings or crimes that they may have committed while they were still alive, right? So in an extreme example, let's just say some of the people who died in battle were murderers or rapists or, dare I say, pedos. But hey, they died in battle for Athens, so they're heroes now. And we do this today, right? No matter what, they are heroes. We try to stay on the level of generalities so we don't look closer to see how maybe some of them were kind of despicable, right? That they weren't given a choice, either go to prison or join the military, and now they're in the military. I talked, there was an episode I did where I talked about this, where the guy who worked at the place where I got hearing aids, or where I was thinking about getting hearing aids, he was a sergeant in the army, and he said half of his unit, or there were a lot of guys in his unit who were there because they chose to join the military instead of going to prison. And maybe one or two rapists in there. And what do rapists do? They rape in other countries. So there is that. But hey, if they die in battle, they're a hero now. Now you can think well of them, that they actually had a noble life, right? And so that's the thing. When you use rhetoric like this, when you talk like this, when you give a speech like this, right, you basically are playing on the emotions of people, right? Uh, Pericles says there's not a coward among them. They kept their honor in battle. How do you know? You know, even if they weren't, what are you going to say? Oh, yeah, these people who didn't have to die in this battle, some of them are cowards. No, you're not going to say that. You have to keep it always 100% upbeat. Why? Because you need more soldiers. And so you need more young people to say, "Wow, this is awesome, man. If you're going to go, this would not be a bad way to go." And a lot of young people see the attention, the glory of a funeral, and they want that for themselves, perhaps. I saw this in Homer's Iliad as well. If you imagine, right, he's going from town to town telling the story. He was a storyteller, and they didn't have entertainment thousands of years ago. They're working hard all day, and so what do they do at night to kick back? They listen to the storyteller who just blew into town. And he'll tell these stories of wars and battles, and it makes it sound so cool. But of course, when I taught the Iliad, I would always say, if you read between the lines, though, right, especially the relationship between Achilles and Patrocles, you know, that war sucks, right? This is not something that you want to, engage in, or if you do, because you need glory, uh, just know that there's a very, very high risk. And it's not all peaches and cream either. But Pericles goes on in his speech. He says that they all made a sacrifice, right? And so that's what death in war is generally called. People on your side, they made a sacrifice. In other words, soldiers gave up their lives so everyone else can have a life. This gives their death some kind of meaning, right? It makes them perhaps martyrs so that more people will join the fight, right? Freedom isn't free, as the cliche goes. Or I hear some people use the Thomas Jefferson quote, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." Okay, that quote can easily be abused, right? And so basically, Pericles is saying to his listening audience at this, public funeral for all of the war dead, try to be like these men. Realize that happiness lies in liberty and liberty and valor. So don't hold back from the dangers of war, right? So he's trying to get more recruits. So on the one hand, he's consoling the families, the parents, widows, orphans, and he's recruiting people. Fast forward a year or so, and a plague has hit the city. A lot of people are dying. Soldiers are dying. People are dying. And I did a little research. I was trying to figure out what the disease was. And at least where I looked it up, and I think it was in an encyclopedia, uh, yeah, no one knows what the disease was, but it was probably something like cholera or something, right? Because so many people moved into the city of Athens because of the war, and so they fled to Athens for safety. The population of Athens ballooned. I think it was something like 10 times more than it normally is in the city. And so that's a lot of poop, right? There's a lot of pee and poop. And so there probably disease that broke out. And it took like 20% of the population, 20% of the soldiers, 20% of the Navy, right? And so people are now upset. Now people are still dying on the battlefield, and now they're dying in the city. And so they're really upset with Pericles. And so Pericles says to them in his final speech, he says, "You wanted this war too. Don't put it on me, right? You wanted this war too." He says that he hasn't changed, but the people have, right? I haven't changed my mind, but you've changed your mind. But you can't give up now, right? So that was how it ends, and then he dies of the plague as well. And I thought it was very similar. It's interesting that speeches that you hear today in America, very, very similar. The excuses that are given, very, very similar. And it got me thinking that, although the people are different, culture is different, language is different, the war is different, the weapons are different, yet human nature is the same, right? The packaging is a little bit different. I guess that's why some people say history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. Yeah, okay, whatever, you know. But it got me thinking that a country that speaks publicly like this, when the leadership speaks like this publicly, it's a country that's shoveling a lot of propaganda, right? Is it to convince themselves or to convince all these people, right? It's part of that projection problem that keeps coming up, right? So they like to accuse other people of a certain problem, but in fact, they're talking about themselves. It's not you, it's me, but it really is me, right? And so the problems originate from the leadership that make these boneheaded decisions. And you know that it's a lot of propaganda because at the same time, there's a lot of censorship, right? So today we see lots of censorship about Ukraine, about Israel, about Yemen. Israel's desire for a greater Israel is based on the assumption that the United States will help and fight alongside of them, right? Kind of reminds you of the Corinth Sparta thing. Remember when people kept saying Russia already lost? And it seems that Trump believes all of these lies and propaganda. Russia's on the verge of victory, right? That's why they need a ceasefire. And it seems that, and some people have said it, especially on Judge Napolitano's podcast, that Trump seems to believe the propaganda. Like he doesn't realize that it's not true that Russia has already lost. And so Trump is just simply trying to mediate. But then you probably saw that people are criticizing Trump because how can someone who is actually part of the fighting be a mediator between Ukraine and Russia, right? If not for the United States, there would be no war. It would already have been over. But because the United States is funding, bankrolling, supplying weapons, and the intelligence, yeah, very much so the United States is part of this war. Uh, but Trump is pretending like, yeah, he has nothing to do with it as more money is being sent to the Ukraine. Then there's that story of the F-18 that rolled off an aircraft carrier, right? Well, why did it roll off an aircraft carrier? Oh, because the aircraft carrier was executing a very high-speed maneuver to avoid a Houthi missile. What the Houthis are supposed to be those primitive desert dwellers, right? Who, that Trump, bombed the crap out of, and so there's no way they can retaliate and much less shoot a missile at an aircraft carrier. But that's what they did, right? So all those air defenses of an aircraft carrier could not bring down the Houthi missile. It's insane. And so then we lose a $56 million plane. It rolls off the deck of the carrier. Meanwhile, UPS lays off 20,000 people, right? Primarily because Amazon is is setting up its own delivery service, right? That's why you see Amazon trucks, not UPS trucks, right? But then Amazon turns around and starts putting tariff pricing, and then the Trump administration calls it hostile. And the reason is because the Trump administration has to maintain the lie that other countries are paying for the tariffs, right? So it's a bad look. So all these things are happening. What will it take for the United States? I mean, Trump will never work out, but I have a feeling that he's in mental decline, right? I was reluctant to say it, but I think it's easy to say now that, I mean, it's not nearly as bad as Biden's mental decline, but there's clearly, like if you watch uh, recordings of him 30 years ago, he's not the same guy. So, uh, the mental decline is there. How much? I don't know. But the fact that it's even there, that you can notice it, means that really he shouldn't be president. And he's running out of time. Not lifetime, But the fact that the treasuries are not safe, if you listen to today's ITM trading episode with Taylor Kenny, she discussed the bank stress tests were made easier because the treasuries are that much more safe, unsafe. Rafi Farber went into talking about the repo markets, and it's much, much worse. If you want to just see what this, what they call that, the basis trade is all about, just listen to that episode. So you take all of these news stories together, and it's becoming a clown show. Um, I wouldn't know it, but I listened to Colonel McGregor. He was on talking to Judge Knapp, and I mean, Judge Knapp asked him, what do you think about what's going on? And he says it's amateur hour at the White House. I don't know too much of what it's supposed to look like, but he's like, this is total amateur hour. And so serious countries, serious leaders of other serious countries are looking at America and thinking, what is this? And I thought that maybe, the Biden administration, they were able to hide Biden's decline and be able to do what they did for 4 years because all of the people in that administration lied their whole lives. And so it's second nature. And so they can cover up all of the incompetency. And plus, they were in government all of their lives as well. So you don't see the same kind of mistakes that you're seeing in the Trump White House. My wife went to Costco today and she said that it was filled with seniors. I'm a, all right. It's weird for me to say that because I'm like 60, but much, much older than me. She said they were using walkers, they were in wheelchairs, scooters, and they were stocking up because of the upcoming supply shortages, right? These are fixed income people and they need to stock up now before the prices change. And she said she overheard some of the conversations, right? You normally don't see seniors at a big box store because they can't eat that much. They don't go through all of the supplies that quickly, but they were there primarily to take advantage of the pricing, but also to stock up. It made me feel weird, right? Because, years ago, I started seeing them going back to work because their retirement just wasn't enough anymore. And now they have to stock up. Oh, this is going to be ugly when everything starts going sideways. If there is a reset, right? A dollar reset, or if there is a war, if there is an economic collapse in the next few years, this is going to be bad. Right. And I think it's really unfortunate that Trump is doing what he's doing because all he's doing, if he keeps doing this, right, not only is his approval ratings really, really low, but it sets up for an even more extremist Democrat president the next time around. So he's running out of time. I hope he can turn it around, but and start leveling with the American people. See, that's what he should do. He should take advantage of his popularity and just start telling the truth, or firing all of the neocons around him and getting better advisors to prepare the American people for what's coming. And unfortunately, he's not doing that. Sorry to end on a down note, but that is the news today. And I'll talk to you next time.